On June 10th, 2019, two parents, Jessica and Daniel Groves, were arrested after avoiding contact with the social services in Scioto, Ohio. The child services had been trying to contact them for the last 2 months because they needed to hand over their 3-month-old baby because they just were not fit to be parents. The problem was when they found the parents in their home, baby Dylan wasn't there. The parents tried claiming that Dylan was with social services, but the caseworker, Patricia Kraft, said she hadn't actually seen the baby since March 28th. The police tried so hard to find answers from both of these parents, but they didn't cooperate. They were both completely dope sick, and eventually, after interrogating both of the parents, they put them in their own little room to talk. While the parents were in their own room to talk, they began to whisper, and they eventually mentioned how they would both be fucked if the police found Dylan, because the police would be able to tell that the parents murdered their own 11-week-old baby. Finally, on June 12th, 2019, Daniel took the police to where baby Dylan was. Dylan Groves was an 11-week-old baby who was found dead in a 30-foot deep well. And this isn't a well you might be thinking of. This is more of a well that's just a hole in the ground. This isn't some Disneyland wishing well. When they finally retrieved what they needed, they found 2 milk crates, which were held together by their open ends and secured with chains woven through their handles. There was wires, padlocks inside the milk crates, and there was 18 large rocks and a small 11-week, 4-pound baby wrapped in blankets and layers of plastic. During the autopsy, they found that Dylan's skull was broken, along with fractures throughout his entire body that were all at different stages of healing, meaning they all happened at different times. Daniel and Jessica were right. They were fucked. This is the case in the story of the 11-week-old baby Dylan Groves and how his parents cared more about drugs than their own baby. Hi, welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and with me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things, whether it's true crime, mysteries, or whatever we find interesting. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Dylan Groves, who was an 11-week-old baby who was murdered by his parents. This is going to be a pretty heavy episode, so we will be talking a lot about child abuse, infant death, and we also will be talking about drug abuse. So if any of that is maybe too close to home, or maybe your mental health isn't in the best place, I suggest maybe watching another one of our episodes or taking care of yourself, and we'll see you in another episode. All of the information we have found is online, and we're just here to tell the story. But if anything we say needs to be corrected, or maybe you have additional information, feel free to let us know in the comments below. All of our opinions stated are ours alone. We don't speak for anyone. We mean no harm to anyone that is affected by this case. I also want to say that we will be talking about people who are addicted to drugs, and I believe that addiction is very serious. This isn't an episode of me trying to critique anyone who may be addicted, and I highly suggest that if anyone is listening to this and maybe you are struggling with it, that you reach out to someone. We will add hotlines in the description below if anyone is interested. But I think with that, we can begin. During this episode, I think I'm going to kind of use a timeline because a timeline will kind of make sense throughout it. So if you hear me using a lot of dates, that's pretty much why, because this case has a lot of, I guess, like loopholes in a way, the way the parents were behaving. January 10th, 2019. Jessica and Daniel Groves, they're married, they're this couple, and they arrive at the hospital at 5:23 a.m. Jessica's in labor and she's 9.5 centimeters dilated. So she's pretty close to giving birth. The nurses kind of noted that she seemed really out of it. She had flat effect. She was disconnected. She wasn't really cooperating. She was kind of not there mentally. And when they tried asking her questions about her like prenatal care, she wasn't really answering. They kind of suspected she was on drugs because the way she was behaving. Because I mean, most women that are about to give birth when they're 9.5 centimeters dilated are going to be showing some kind of discomfort, and she just didn't seem like it. And so they kind of suspected she was on drugs. And in order to give her pain medication, they needed to know she was on drugs, but she would not let them know. They tried to get her to do a urine sample, but she just would not do it. They couldn't really give her medication if they didn't know she was on drugs because they didn't want to hurt her or the baby. She kept saying, "I'm not on drugs," which was very obvious she was, but of course they can't just assume, they have to know. They ended up actually being able to get a sample through a catheter. When Jessica kept saying like she wasn't in pain, her doctor, so Dr. Adams, who was an OBGYN, believed that Jessica was extremely high because her not being on any kind of pain, especially with no pain medication, just kind of came across really weird. They really suspected that she was on drugs, so they eventually were able to get that test back, and she tested positive for amphetamines. So moments before Dylan was even born, Daniel stated that Jessica had actually admitted moments before they arrived at the hospital that she'd been using heroin 2 days prior. The nurses would go on to say that Daniel acted really worried and scared when they were questioning him and also Jessica. When they would ask Daniel questions, he would kind of look at Jessica as if he was waiting for permission to speak. And one of the nurses said that she felt as if Daniel was wanting to talk or say more, but he felt like he couldn't. So within 30 minutes, Dylan was born. He was 5 pounds and 10 ounces. Dylan was born 1 month early, and he was placed immediately on oxygen due to him having difficulty breathing. Both baby Dylan and Jessica tested positive for drugs. Dylan's umbilical cord was tested positive for amphetamines, meth, fentanyl, opioids, and morphine. Jessica had been using drugs her entire pregnancy. This isn't a situation of a mother who was using and then found out she was pregnant and, maybe it was a little late, but she tried to come off it. She just continued to use it even though she knew she was pregnant. Jessica didn't even hold baby Dylan that long. She held him for a total of 15 minutes before handing him to a nurse saying, "Put him there on the wall." Which is really odd because a lot of moms want to, but I do want to make it very clear that sometimes mothers, when they give birth, you just gave birth to an entire baby out of you. Like, that's crazy. And some people struggle with postpartum depression or psychosis, or you might be mentally drained. That doesn't immediately make you a terrible mother if you are exhausted and you might not want to hold your baby. But she was very distant from baby Dylan. He was suffering a lot. So he was a drug-dependent baby. He had tremors. He couldn't quiet himself. He would twitch, and he just wanted to be held. The child services intended to give Daniel custody of baby Dylan since they believed Daniel was employed at this local farm supply store called Rural King, which they later found out he had quit in 2018, but they didn't find out till way later, which is just very upsetting because they just didn't do their research. They didn't check in with that place. They just were like, oh, he said he's working somewhere. We're just going to believe him. So the original plan was that if Daniel was able to provide a clean drug test, they would be able to give Dylan back to Daniel under the pretenses that Jessica did not live in the same house. And she also needed to attend drug treatment. Daniel had also told the child services that he didn't even know Jessica was using, which I don't know if is even true. I think he did know. The hospital, the only one with brains in this entire thing, refused to let Dylan leave until they had his tests back. This is before they found out about all the drugs. That they believed if both the mom and the baby are positive for drugs, that it should be an automatic removal from the home. The only people with honestly brains in this entire situation. So between the days of January 10th to the 15th, Dylan stayed in the hospital for those entire days. During these 5 days, his parents did not once come to see him or even ask about him, which I just think is so sad. This little baby's on drugs and they don't even care to see him. There's nothing wrong with a parent potentially maybe not wanting to do that. Like, maybe you give birth and you're like, I don't want to have a child, and you want to give that child to child services, or you want to set them up for adoption or foster care, but they weren't really wanting to do that. They thought that they could just have their baby, but they're not even showing any ounce of care for his health. After the 5 days, Dylan was given to child services and he was placed into foster care. Between the days of the 16th of January to the 28th, Andrea Bowling was an elementary teacher. She had done all of her training to become a foster mom, and she honestly loved Dylan, and she still does. She is the only parent Dylan had. She received a call while she was at work if she wanted to become a foster parent to Dylan, who was this drug-dependent baby, and she of course said yes. She was able to get a lot of support from her family, her friends, from her church, her community. They were giving her all the stuff she needed because this was a very rapid and fast thing that she needed to prepare for. So she went and picked up Dylan, and she had him in her custody for 10 to 12 days. During this time, Andrea stated that Dylan had a lot of tremors, he was very drug dependent, and he just wanted to be held, and she said he would relax when he was just held. During this entire time, Jessica was in a drug treatment, and she was also attending therapy appointments. This is something that she had to complete. Daniel was also told to complete a drug abuse test and follow all of his recommendations before he could have custody. So the new plan had Jessica sign a release form, and she had to do her drug and alcohol assessment, and she had to submit weekly contact with the drug treatment program. She was also not allowed to live at the home until further notice or if she was supervised. Basically, Jessica just needed to complete this program until she'd be able to be in the home and have custody again for Dylan. So on January 25th, this is where the caseworker Patricia Kraft comes in. She ends up meeting with the parents along with another caseworker and Andrea. So during this time, they kind of just chit-chatting, and Andrea gives the parents diapers, supplies, and she even gave them a letter with all of her contact information to basically say, if you need any help, you guys can call me, and that she'd be available if, things get hard, or maybe they needed a babysitter or anything. After this, Andrea ended up calling Child Services and said that she was concerned about the parents because she noted how Jessica seemed to be pretty high. But according to social services, they had a policy that since Daniel had no violent criminal history, that Dylan could be returned to Daniel if Daniel was clean. So she tried to do what she could, but social services was just like, there's nothing else we can do. So Daniel's drug test did come back clean, and Dylan was given back to the custody to Daniel, again with the pretenses that Jessica was not allowed to stay at the house and she had to complete her treatment plan. February 4th, the caseworker, she ends up visiting the home, and she notices that Dylan seems quiet and that Daniel and Jessica seemed to love him and they were holding him, and that everything was kind of going as it was planned. Jessica was in her treatment. Jessica had actually been attending her treatment plan and her therapy, but then she became pretty inconsistent and eventually stopped going altogether. And her therapist tried contacting Jessica multiple times and was receiving nothing. So throughout the month of February, March, and a little bit of April, she contacted social services to say Jessica wasn't complying with her job of what she needed to do. So between the dates of February 4th to the 21st, this is where things get a little sketchy. Social services tries to contact the family multiple times, but they kept receiving nothing. They were calling and going to the house, but no one was home. So the caseworker ended up going to where Daniel Jr., so that's another son they had. He was a 14-year-old at the time of the case. So they went to his school and handed him a note saying, hey, can you get your dad to call us back? And on the 25th of February, she was finally able to get back into contact with Daniel, and she ended up doing a check-in with Dylan. Dylan was clean. He had no injuries. He was being fed. He was wearing proper clothes. And in other words, he seemed really healthy. Dylan had also been to a doctor on the 21st of February where the doctor noted he had no injuries, but he did weigh on the lower end. He was 7 pounds. So this doctor asked for Dylan to come back a month later to see if there was any improvement. Although Dylan was a drug-dependent baby, he was overall doing pretty well in his development at what it seemed. So March 18th was the new monthly check-in. Daniel had actually called Kraft and said, hey, I'm not home. I'm actually away because my father is very sick and I won't be able to be there. Can we make it for March 21st? So when March 21st comes around, no one's home. The caseworker tries to contact Daniel so many different times, and then she receives a voicemail again from Daniel saying, hey, I'm still with my dad. I'm sorry. That was, to me, very odd that the caseworkers didn't find that weird, that he wasn't trying hard enough to show them that he's this good parent. I feel like most parents, if you were trying to prove yourself, you would do everything you can. But I mean, if his father's sick, what can he do? The 21st was also the appointment for Dylan to go in for his check-in, but only Jessica showed up, which is like, okay, well, I guess
kind of need a child.
Yeah. And so baby Dylan most likely was with Daniel at this time. March 26th, Jessica ended up going to her last group session. Her therapist noted that Jessica was very angry. She was distant. She was very defensive. And she started blaming child services on everything. This was kind of a common theme with Jessica. She would blame everyone else but herself because, like, girl, you're the one who did the drugs. It's not their fault for taking your baby away or not letting you have the custody. You are the one who did drugs. This is your problem. The therapist also said that she noted that Jessica had looked high or at least under some kind of substance. So March 27th, there was a court hearing in juvenile court that Jessica and Daniel were supposed to attend, but only Jessica showed. So the caseworkers had to end up filing this complaint saying that Dylan and Daniel Jr. were being neglected and they were being abused, and that for their best interest, it'd be that they should be taken into social services. But baby Dylan is not there. He's with, I don't know, I think he's with Daniel at this point, or he's just not there. Daniel's not there, Jessica's just there, which is just, again, he's probably off seeing his dad. March 28th, the caseworker shows up and she interacts with Dylan and Daniel, and she claims that Dylan seemed fine with no injuries. I want to note that they also wouldn't let the caseworker hold Dylan, which a lot of the prosecutors believe that this was intentional so that they wouldn't know that Dylan potentially had injuries, like maybe a bump on his head or something. I will come back to this date because it's very important. This was also the day where they asked if Jessica could come back and live with them, and she said she'd ask her supervisor, which okay. After March 28th, that's the last time anyone saw Dylan alive. There was a court hearing on April 13th, and Daniel texted Kraft again saying he was trying to get home, but his car broke down when he was in Canton visiting his dad, so they needed to reschedule. During the entire month of April, the caseworker was trying so hard to get in contact with the family, but she was getting nothing. She was getting radio silence. They wanted to keep Dylan in social services, but they needed to get baby Dylan, and they were trying to contact Daniel to see what's going on. So this is actually where the caseworker ends up contacting his work and finding out that he had quit in 2018, which I believe is something that they should have checked way before Dylan was even given to Daniel. I don't know why they didn't do their job and just do a basic call. Hey, does he work here? I don't know why they didn't do that. They just took his word for it.
Wait, so when did this whole case occur? Like what year?
2019.
Oh, oh, so he's been jobless for a year.
Yeah, so I believe he stopped working at that farm shop in the summer of 2018. So it's been like, I believe, 6 months. And he tried saying, like, oh, I was on a leave from work because of drugs or something, like some bullshit. But then his work was like, he quit, which is just very upsetting that the caseworkers didn't do their job to check in. I just feel like that's something you should have done immediately before you hand a baby to parents that are on drugs. Between April 19th and the 24th, the caseworker could not get a hold of Daniel. She kept going to the house, she kept leaving notes, she kept checking in. She was calling on multiple different phone numbers that he had. So she couldn't get a hold, so she decided to go to Daniel Jr.'s school and talk to him. He seemed really nervous, which, I mean, I feel so bad for this kid because he's 14 years old. His parents don't care. And to have like a social worker come to you at school would probably be pretty humiliating. But he was like really nervous. And when they asked him about Dylan, he was like, yeah, Dylan seems all right. And then they asked him about Jessica. And he actually said that Jessica had been staying there occasionally, which she wasn't supposed to. So there's that. When they decided to ask him, though, about his grandfather who was sick, that's where Daniel Jr. would go on to say, who is that? And so the caseworkers are now thinking, oh shit. So they end up putting Daniel Jr. in child services and he gets placed into the home of his aunt and uncle. But one problem, they need to go and get Dylan. So Daniel, he texts Kraft asking where Daniel Jr. is. She ends up trying to visit the home, but she's getting nothing again. She would note that every time she would go there, like there would be cars there or their dogs were home, but they were never home. She said it was very odd. And so she ended up texting or calling Daniel saying, hey, you need to bring Dylan to the agency along with all of his personal belongings. And Daniel said, okay, I will. But he didn't. By April 30th, there was a missing persons report for Dylan because now he's no longer supposed to be in their custody. Throughout May and the beginning of June, the caseworker, she tried so hard. She made multiple visits. She visited the home with the police, another caseworker. They were getting nothing. On May 20th, Sheriff Captain John Murphy, he tries going to the home to locate Dylan, and he noted that the driveway was cabled off with motion detectors, which is odd. I mean, I can kind of get having motion detectors if you're worried, but just a little odd. He started talking to a neighbor about Jessica and Daniel and where they are, and that neighbor said that they usually come home late and that they usually are on a four-wheeler. And that's where John actually saw them on this four-wheeler. He tries to go up to them and stop them, but they just take off into a field and into the woods. And he's like, what the hell? Okay. So now they decide we need to go and get a warrant. The police on June 10th arrive at the house with their search warrant, and after a long time, Jessica finally comes out. She's aggressive, angry, saying Daniel isn't home, that they took both of her kids, that Dylan had been with the child services. They took him months ago. I don't know why she thought this would be a good idea to lie about, because this is something that they'd be able to track down. Obviously, he wasn't there. So after a while of her being like, Daniel's not home, the police decide to send in those little like robots that they can send into a home where maybe if they feel like it's not safe to go into. So they searched the home with this little robot and they find Daniel. And Daniel was like, oh, I was just sleeping, which, okay, yeah, sure. So after this long and there's like this standoff of them fighting and talking, they finally are arrested. They tell the police that their caseworker Kraft had taken Dylan months ago, but Kraft is sitting there saying, no, I hadn't seen baby Dylan since March 28th. It's June 10th. She also stated later in court, which really upset me, that her supervisor didn't want to do an Amber Alert because it would look bad on the agency if they had a child missing. I'm sorry, that's just so stupid. I have no other words for that. It just makes me so mad. You're more upset about it looking bad than a child missing or potentially being dead. Like, where's the brain in this?
That's so fucked up.
Honestly.
So, like, did they allow her to stay with Daniel again? Because, like, for her to be like, oh, yeah, he's just sleeping. Like, why are you here?
Yeah, she wasn't supposed to. They claimed that she was allowed to during the day, but again, she wasn't supposed to. She was only allowed to be there if she was supervised. And she also wasn't doing her drug treatment plan, so she wasn't even supposed to be there, which is just, yeah. June 11th, they're being interviewed and interrogated separately. Jessica was noted to be very standoffish. She was very cold and she just didn't want to talk. She was just like pissed off that she was even there. She kept saying that the child services had already taken Dylan along with their other son and that she wasn't on drugs, which, girl, like, I'm sorry, anytime you're around anyone who's ever been under any kind of substance, you can always tell. It's just very obvious. And I mean, girl, they can just do a test.
Even if it's not obvious, they can do a drug test and they're gonna figure out real quick.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, why are you lying? Daniel was also interviewed, and Daniel was noted to be very dope sick. He was having a lot of withdrawals. He was rolling on the floor. He was just in a lot of pain. And he was also like passing a lot of gas, which, I mean, I'm so sorry for the interrogators and that.
Is that normal when you're dope sick to just be gassing up?
I don't know enough of that, but I'm assuming.
Or is he just being rude?
I think he was like having a lot of like stomach pains and stuff. So I'm assuming like maybe that has something to do with it. But I'm not sure exactly. I'm not an expert in that.
True.
He actually went on to admit that Dylan was dead, that he found him dead in the crib. The police are like, hey, can you take us to where Dylan is? And he says yes. So they go to where baby Dylan is, but there's nothing there. He lied. It was just a red herring, I guess. The detectives are just saying to him, like, why are you doing this? Like, where is he? It was noted in some of the court documents that Jessica had convinced Daniel that because he had custody of Dylan, that he would be the one at fault. I don't want to give Daniel any excuses. I do think Jessica had a lot more power in their relationship, but I also think Daniel is also acting as if he just had no control, which I just think is bullshit.
He's the legal guardian. So,
yeah. I mean, I've never been in this situation, obviously, but if I had a child and I found them dead, I would immediately call the police. I wouldn't be afraid of them thinking it's me if I didn't do anything. I would be calling so fast because I wouldn't have anything to hide.
True.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because he's under drugs, so he doesn't have the same like thinking. I don't know. After they're kind of talking to Daniel, he ends up asking if he can talk to Jessica. So they put them in their own little room, their interrogation room, and they begin to whisper to each other. They first are like complaining a lot about the fact that they're even there, that they miss their dogs, all of this. They don't once
Oh my gosh, like no sympathy for their child who's dead.
Yeah, they don't care about any of their kids. They're not asking about Daniel Jr. They're not talking about Dylan. They're just like, "Oh, I miss my dogs. Oh, I don't want to be here." It's just so weird. But then they begin to whisper. Daniel whispers about how he took them to the wrong place and that he didn't want the police to find Dylan. And Daniel said if they find his body and they find out where he had a broken arm and shit, we're fucked. It don't matter. They remove Jessica from the room and they start to confront Daniel. I'm assuming Daniel and Jessica were whispering because they knew they were recorded, but they probably thought they weren't going to be, I don't know, caught on the camera or something on the microphone. But once they remove Jessica, they start to talk to Daniel, being like, "We found out you didn't take us to him, so where is he?" The detective, she starts getting a little bit more mad. She's like, "I've been very nice to you. Why are you not giving me that back? I know that you know where Dylan is." And Daniel's like, "I don't know where he is. I'm telling you." But it's like, girl, we freaking heard you on the camera. Like, come on. After a while, Daniel finally is convinced to take them to where baby Dylan is. Daniel leads them to this field that was near their home where there's this well. Again, this well is just a hole in the ground. It's very watery and mucky around. It was really hard for them to get there. So they actually had to go get the fire department to help them assist in getting baby Dylan. When they finally receive his body was contained in 2 plastic milk crates, which were held together by their open ends, secured with chains through their handles, along with 3 padlocks, 12 zip ties, 8 wire ties. Inside the milk crates were 18 large rocks and what was described by a medical examiner who performed the autopsy as an iron anchor type of device. Dylan's body was wrapped in 2 blankets, numerous layers of plastic, and duct tape. He was wearing a onesie, socks, and a diaper when he was recovered. When they did the autopsy, Dylan suffered 2 skull fractures that were at different stages of healing, which indicated that it didn't happen at the same time. There was bruises to
Holy
his
shit.
right side of his chest, his left leg. There was a laceration on his left arm, fractures to his left forearm, to his shin, and his 6th and 7th rib were also fractured, but they were both at different stages of healing. His body was also decomposing, and there was changes to his stomach. His organs were decomposed, and his brain was a pink color, opposed to a tan color, which would really indicate that there was bleeding in the brain. His cause of death was declared as homicide while suffering from blunt force trauma, but the specifics of his cause of death couldn't be determined because his body was too decomposed because he had been concealed in the water for 2 months. It was confirmed.
Oh.
Yeah, so it was confirmed Dylan had injuries on the 27th of March and he died on March 28th. He was just 11 weeks old. That's where I'm very confused because the caseworker supposedly was there on March 28th. I don't know how she didn't notice this. It was noted that the parents didn't let her hold him. I do feel that she does have some part to blame in doing her job. Her sole job is to make sure a baby is okay, and she didn't do that. That's just my opinion. I don't know enough of what social workers do, but that's just my opinion. He weighed 4 pounds and 8 ounces when he was 7 pounds in February. According to my research, 3-month-old babies typically weigh 12 to 14 pounds. Now, I know he was decomposing, so that maybe puts in a factor, I'm assuming, but they also found drugs in his system, which he shouldn't have had any drugs in his system. This probably means that he either found drugs in the home and touched it and put it to his mouth, or he was being breastfed by Jessica while she was using. But neither were confirmed, so I don't know exactly how he had drugs in his system.
Yeah. I mean, he's only an 11-week-old child, right?
Yeah.
So he wouldn't really be that mobile.
Yeah, he'd be crawling and stuff. I mean, I don't know like the developmental stages of babies, but I don't think 11 weeks you're already crawling and running around.
Yeah, since he's, like, emaciated or what was happening at the time, I don't think he would particularly have a lot of energy.
Yeah, exactly. So during the trial, Daniel Jr. stated he actually saw bruises, so this is the son, and swelling on Dylan's head. But Daniel, the dad, he said that this was from Dylan's dream catcher, that he probably got it caught on his arm, and when he must have swung it and hit him in the head, which I don't think babies have that power to do that. And to have two skull fractures, I don't know how strong that dream catcher is. And so Daniel Jr. was also like, yeah, I don't believe that at all. He said that he also was forced or maybe convinced to give his own urine to his dad for drug
What?
tests. Yeah. Daniel confessed to not being home when Dylan was murdered, nor did he take part in the murder, which Jessica did confess that he wasn't a part of it. He did admit to watching the abuse happen. He would say Jessica would hit baby Dylan when he would cry, because, baby Dylan's a baby, is what they do. They can't speak. And she would just hit him. She also would hold Dylan by his ribs. Babies, especially newborns, they have to have support on their neck because they can't support their own heads. She did not know how to hold a baby. He would also give her coke to calm her down because she'd be so agitated and aggressive, and that was how she would calm down. One thing Daniel stated that I just think is complete bullshit is that he said he believed he dreamed that the abuse happened, which is such a cop-out. I'm sorry. Like, no, what? So the prosecutor fought him on this, saying, you watched this abuse happen and were you concerned? And he said, yeah. She used this as a way to be like, you were concerned for your baby, but you didn't do anything to stop this. You didn't call the police.
Mhm.
You didn't call Andrea. You didn't call the social workers. You didn't kick Jessica out of the home after you saw her hit your child. You did not care enough. And he also was the one that when Dylan died, he wrapped Dylan up and put him in the plastic and put him in the well, which he claimed was out of panic. And the prosecutor said, that doesn't look like panic to me. That is straight up.
Premeditation.
Yeah, panic is not grabbing milk crates and taking a baby, wrapping him in blankets. That's not panic. Even if you started panicking and you started doing that, I feel like there would be a moment of you being like, what am I doing? And why would you protect your partner from this? So when they asked Jessica how she murdered Dylan, she kept saying, I don't know, I don't remember. And then she said she dropped him, which, girl, how many times did you drop him and how hard? Because there's no way. His doctor even said, like Dylan's doctor said, that he had never seen in his 30 years of experience where a newborn has a skull fracture. That just doesn't happen. They can't hurt themselves that hard.
Didn't he have multiple skull fractures?
Yeah. He had two. She would never confess, but she kept playing the victim, saying things like, I'm not going to answer, I'm done talking to you. She wasn't going to say how she did it. She eventually was forced to because her team was like, you have to say it. You can't not answer. She's acting like a child that's like, I'm not talking to you. So she, again, took no blame. And then she blamed the social services and the police by saying to the prosecutor, you devoured my family, which is just so stupid because no, you did. You're the reason your child's dead. No one else is. You are the reason your baby is dead. They both were just incredibly selfish addicts who just didn't care for their children. They just cared more for their drugs than their actual baby's health. Jessica and Daniel had access to a lot of programs and people they could have asked for help. From what I've seen from those online, people were wondering why they wanted their child when it seemed so clearly that they didn't care about this child. But a lot of people who work in programs and just people online pretty much suspect that they wanted Dylan because they would get government funding, which they would use for drugs, which they did. Jessica was found guilty on all accounts, which was aggravated murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, assault, child endangerment, and she was sentenced to life with no parole and an additional 32 years. Daniel, he was found acquitted for aggravated murder, but he was still found guilty on all the accounts, and he received a full total of 47 years with the possible chance of parole. They were found guilty on January 10th, 2020, which would have been Dylan's first birthday. Dylan did have a vigil on June 13th. January 10th is an annual day that the organization Justice for Dylan has, where they do random acts of kindness for a child to honor Dylan. You can find more about this under the hashtag Justice for Dylan. I think it's a very cute idea and a very sweet idea. Just, if you see a child, just being nice to them or complimenting them on their cool, like, light up sneakers.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, if you do see something become annoying, call the police, call social services, be obnoxious until you no longer can't. I know that sometimes you really can't. It's up to the police. I do feel like the caseworkers failed Dylan. Almost everyone failed Dylan except for Andrea and a few other people in his life. But that's what we have for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like us to talk about another topic, you can fill in our Google form that's linked in our description, and we will see you guys in another episode.